My name is Lillian Brooks. I'm 33 years old, and the moment I realized my relationship was over, it didn't sound like heartbreak. It sounded like clarity, the kind that settles in quietly, almost politely, like your mind has already made the decision long before your heart catches up. You think everything should just revolve around what you want, don't you? Ethan's voice wasn't loud. That's what made it worse. We were sitting on the couch, halfway through some old romantic movie I had picked, the kind with soft lighting and predictable endings. I remember leaning into him, resting my hand lightly on his chest, the way I had done 100 times before without thinking. Familiar. Safe. Mine. But this time his body didn't respond the same way. It stiffened. Subtle but unmistakable. Like I had crossed a line I didn't know existed. He reached for the remote, paused the movie, and stared straight ahead. Just because we're together doesn't mean I owe you physical closeness. Calm voice, cold tone, like he had practiced it. I blinked, pulling back slightly, trying to process what I had just heard. Oh, wait, what? You heard me. And just like that, silence. Not the kind where you're both thinking. This was heavier, like something had already ended, and we were just sitting there pretending it hadn't. The movie stayed frozen on a couple mid-laugh, their happiness suspended on the screen while we sat on opposite sides of the couch like strangers. And that's the part that messes with your head. You're not fighting. But you're not safe either. I looked at him, really looked, and noticed the details I had ignored before. His arms crossed, his gaze avoiding mine. This wasn't a reaction. It was a decision, and maybe it had been building for a while. I just hadn't seen it. The next morning I started doing the math. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. How many meals I had cooked while he scrolled through his phone. How many times I reached for his hand and found it already occupied. With keys, coffee, anything but me. We lived in Houston, in a modest house with a cedar porch that creaked when you stepped too hard. I worked logistics at a warehouse on the south side. Long hours. Good people. Nothing glamorous. The kind of job that leaves your shirt wrinkled, no matter how many times you wash it. I used to rush home. Beat traffic. Beat exhaustion. Just to sit next to him on that couch and hear about his day. But after that night, something cracked. Not loudly. Quietly. Like glass that doesn't shatter right away. But you know it will. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I adjusted. I started leaving earlier. Staying later. Picking up extra shifts I didn't really need. The truth was, I didn't want to be home when the silence showed up. We used to have rhythms. Small things. Who made coffee? Who picked the playlist on weekends? Who folded laundry first? Those things disappeared. And without them, the house stopped feeling like ours. It became shared space. Nothing more. I stopped folding his clothes with mine. Stopped asking if he wanted anything from the store. Cooked single portions. Packed them away before he even noticed the stove was on. If someone asks for distance, and you give it to them, they don't always like what it looks like. They just like the idea of control. At first, Ethan didn't say anything. Or maybe he noticed, but chose not to. He still greeted me when I came home. A quiet, distracted, hey, eyes glued to his laptop. He asked about brunch once. I said, do what you want. Not sharp. Not cruel. Just flat. And that's when something shifted. Not in him. In me. I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt was heavier than anger. Like something burning out. Slowly. Silently. Leaving nothing but smoke. Ethan said it casually one morning, like it didn't matter. I applied for a job. Small boutique off Westheimer. He didn't look at me when he said it. Just stirred his coffee like he was waiting. For a reaction. For resistance. For something. I adjusted the strap of my watch, nodded once. Okay. A pause stretched across the kitchen. Thin. Sharp. I figured it's time I handled things on my own terms, he added, a faint edge in his voice. Not defensive, not confident either. Something in between. Like he was bracing for a version of me that didn't exist anymore. I rinsed my cup. Do what you want. And I left. I could feel his eyes on my back as my boots tapped across the tile. That was the thing about silence. It doesn't shout, but it echoes. For the first week, he threw himself into it. New clothes. Color-coordinated outfits laid out the night before. He talked about inventory systems like he had discovered something revolutionary. Set alarms for 6:30 a.m., even though his shift didn't start until 9. I watched it all from the edge of the room. Didn't interfere. Didn't offer help. Didn't ask questions. He wanted independence, so I gave it to him, exactly the way he asked. By week 3, the cracks started to show. Small at first. Easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. The fridge. Half empty. Mustard. A dried-out lemon. Lettuce that had given up days ago. Then the mist shifts. I overheard him rescheduling once. Then again. Then he stopped mentioning work altogether, and I didn't ask. That was new for me. Not asking. Not fixing. Not stepping in. I remember the night it became impossible to ignore. I had just come home from a double shift. My body ached, the kind of deep, heavy exhaustion that settles into your bones and stays there. My shirt clung to my skin from the Houston humidity, and there he was, curled up on the couch. Same clothes as the day before. The room smelled faintly stale. The dog's leash hung untouched by the door. He looked up when he heard me. "Oh," he said, like he had forgotten I existed. "I forgot to take Rolo to his vet appointment." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew anything I said would sound like something I had already said before. So I set my bag down, walked to the kitchen, grabbed the mop and bucket. Mud tracked across the tile in uneven streaks. I filled the bucket slowly. The sound of water hitting plastic filled the silence. Then I started cleaning, one section at a time. Steady, methodical, the way I handled everything. Midnight passed without a real conversation. Just the soft drag of the mop, the occasional creak of the floor, the quiet hum of a house that used to feel alive. I didn't hear him get up, but I felt it. That shift in the air when someone is watching you. I turned slightly and saw him standing in the hallway. Still, small somehow, like the version of him I had known was shrinking into something unfamiliar. He didn't move closer, didn't offer to help, didn't apologize. He just stood there, watching. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel distant. I felt invisible. And I think he felt it too. Because building a separate life isn't just a statement. It's groceries, appointments, floors that get dirty, whether you acknowledge them or not. And when you realize your partner isn't chasing you, isn't arguing, isn't even asking, just quietly living without you, that's when the silence gets loud. "Do you even care anymore?" His voice broke it, soft, tight, like he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. I wrung out the mop, hung the rag over the faucet, then leaned against the sink. The window above it reflected back a version of me I barely recognized. Tired. Hollow, not just from work, from everything. I took a slow breath. "You told me my needs didn't matter. No anger, no accusation. Just truth. Simple, unavoidable." I saw it land. Not all at once, but enough. His shoulders dropped slightly, like something inside him gave way. "I didn't mean—" I shook my head gently. "You said it." That was the difference. Intent didn't erase impact. Silence filled the space again. But this time it wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of everything we hadn't said. He took a step forward, then another, like he wasn't sure how to close the distance anymore. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," he said quietly. I nodded. "I know." And I did. But that didn't change what it had become. He looked around the house. Clean counters, dishes stacked, laundry done, everything in place, everything functioning, except us. And I think that's what broke him. Not yelling, not fighting, just absence. I had stopped trying to fill the gaps, stopped proving my worth, stopped reaching for someone who wasn't reaching back. He sank down slowly, not dramatic, not sudden, just quiet collapse, like something inside him had been holding on longer than it should have. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, hands covering his face. And then he cried. Not loud, not messy, just real. I didn't rush to him, didn't wrap my arms around him like I used to. I walked over, knelt beside him, close enough to be present, far enough to be honest. Sometimes comfort is automatic. This time, it wasn't. "I didn't understand what I was doing," he whispered. I looked at the floor, at the faint marks the mop had missed, at the small imperfections that always remain, no matter how carefully you clean. "I know, but I do now." His voice cracked on that, and I believed him, not because of what he said, but because of how long it took him to say it. 3 days passed after that. Quiet, careful, polite. We moved around each other like strangers sharing space. No arguments, no warmth either. Just awareness. And maybe that was worse. Because once you see the damage clearly, you can't pretend it isn't there. 3 evenings later, I stepped out onto the porch with a cold beer and the kind of exhaustion that didn't come from work. Houston was settling into dusk. That bruised purple hour when the heat finally loosens its grip and the neighborhood starts making its small, familiar noises. Crickets, a screen door somewhere down the block, a dog barking once, then giving up. I sat in the chair near the railing and stared out at the driveway that still needed resurfacing, at the streetlight beginning to glow, at everything ordinary that had somehow started feeling fragile. For a while I just listened. Then the screen door creaked behind me. I didn't turn right away. I knew it was him from the silence he carried with him. Ethan stepped out barefoot, moving slowly, like he wasn't sure he still belonged in this part of the house. He stood beside the empty chair for a second before sitting down. Not too close, not far either. A careful distance. The kind people leave when they know they've broken something and don't know whether touching it will make it worse. I used to think you'd never stop trying, he said quietly. I took a sip of my beer and kept my eyes on the street. I didn't stop. My voice came out calmer than I expected. I just stopped doing it alone. That landed harder than I meant it to. He looked down at his hands, twisting his fingers together once before letting them go. There was no anger in his face now, no cool detachment, just the raw, stripped-down version of someone who had finally run out of places to hide. I didn't mean to belittle your feelings, he said. I really didn't. I thought I was protecting myself. That made me turn toward him. For the first time in weeks, he didn't look away. His eyes were tired. Honest, maybe. Scared, definitely. From what? I asked. He swallowed before answering. From feeling like if I gave in to closeness every time you wanted it, I'd lose control of myself. That if I let too much in, I'd stop knowing where I ended and where you began. The words surprised me, not because they were dramatic, but because they were the first real ones he had given me in a long time. I let them sit between us. The night air moved gently through the porch screen. Somewhere nearby, someone was grilling. The smell of charcoal drifted down the street, and for one strange second, I remembered a summer evening from 2 years ago when Ethan stood barefoot on this same porch, flipping burgers badly, laughing when he nearly dropped the spatula through the railing. I remembered the version of us that had felt easy, not perfect, but open. You could have said that, I told him. I know. You could have said you were afraid. I know. His voice cracked on the second one. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the dark yard. I thought saying no made me strong, he said. I thought if I kept drawing harder lines, I'd feel safer, more in control. But after you pulled back, he paused, and I could hear him forcing himself to finish. It didn't feel like freedom. It felt like I erased us. I breathed out slowly. Love doesn't keep score, I said, but it does notice absence. He shut his eyes for a moment. I know that now. There was a long pause after that, but it didn't feel like the old silence. This one had weight, yes, but not emptiness. It felt like standing in the wreckage and finally naming what had collapsed. When I looked at him again, I didn't see a villain. I didn't see a stranger wearing my boyfriend's face. I saw Ethan, the man who used to dance badly in the kitchen when he thought I was in the shower. The man who once drove across the city at midnight because I had mentioned craving a very specific brand of lemon ice cream. The man who had hurt me. The man who was, maybe for the first time, letting himself be fully seen. I don't know how to fix this all at once, he admitted. You don't, I said. His mouth twitched, almost like he deserved that. But I don't think it gets fixed all at once anyway. He looked at me then, the smallest flicker of hope showing through the shame. Not relief, just hope. And that mattered more. The next morning I noticed the sink before I noticed anything else. Empty. Counters wiped down. The faint scent of lemon soap still hanging in the air. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't performance. It was just something done quietly, early, without needing to be seen. I didn't mention it. I just let myself notice. That night, when I got home, soft music was playing low through the house. Not loud enough to announce itself, just there, warm. I set my keys down and smelled dinner before I reached the dining room. Garlic, rosemary, butter in a hot pan. Real food. Ethan stood by the table with his hair pushed back and one of my old aprons tied around his waist in a knot that sat crooked because he'd never learned how to fasten it properly. 2 plates, 2 glasses, candles he had clearly debated lighting and then decided against. He looked up when I walked in, and for a second he looked so unsure of himself it nearly broke something in me. I cooked, he said, like a question. I nodded once. Smells good. The relief that passed over his face was so brief, I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching. We ate without speeches, without pretending we were suddenly fine. Just the clink of silverware, the occasional glance, a few quiet laughs when he admitted he ruined the first batch of potatoes and had to start over because they somehow turned gray. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down. I never realized how much you carried until I had to carry even part of it alone. I looked up. This time it didn't feel like guilt talking. It felt like recognition. I thought if I proved I could handle everything by myself, you'd respect me more, he said. But all I really did was push you out and then panic when you stayed out. That honesty opened something in the room. Not all the way, just enough. Slowly, I reached across the table. Not to test him, not to make a point, just to see. He looked down at my hand like it was something fragile. then placed his fingers over mine. They trembled a little as they curled around my hand, tighter than usual, like he finally understood how much meaning there could be in something that simple. We talked for hours after dinner, not in one sweeping dramatic conversation, but in the awkward, necessary, honest way people do when they've spent too long assuming the other person should just know. We talked about boundaries, about fear, about how closeness offered freely is different from closeness taken for granted, about how I had started feeling unwanted long before that night on the couch, and how he had started feeling overwhelmed long before he found the language to say it. And maybe the hardest part was realizing neither of us had told the truth early enough. Later, we sat on the couch. The same room, only now the silence didn't feel armed. I turned slightly and reached for him the way I used to. Gently, no pressure, no expectation, just an invitation. He didn't freeze this time. He leaned in, rested his head lightly against my shoulder, and wrapped one hand around my arm like it belonged there. It wasn't magic. It was effort returning to the room. Over the next 2 weeks, we didn't make grand promises. We made smaller choices. He started walking Rolo without being reminded. I stopped waiting for disappointment every time he touched my hand in passing. He asked questions and listened to the answers. I came home earlier on nights when I could. We learned how to notice each other again. Not the polished version. The real one. The tired one. The complicated one. And when it stopped feeling like we were only trying not to break, we decided to leave for a few days. Not to run from anything. Just to step outside the walls that had absorbed too much silence. We booked 4 days in the Florida Keys. No packed itinerary. No desperate attempt to manufacture romance. Just ocean air, quiet mornings, and space. The first evening, we walked barefoot along the beach while the sun melted low into the water and turned everything gold. The wind kept stealing Ethan's hair into his face, and once, when he laughed, really laughed, it startled me because I realized how long it had been since I'd heard that sound without strain underneath it. He bent to pick up a shell and handed it to me like it was treasure. "Ugliest one on the beach," he said. I smiled despite myself. "Then why'd you grab it?" "Because it made me think of us." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not flattering." He laughed again, softer this time. "It is if you let me finish. It's rough, a little chipped, and still somehow intact. That should have been corny. Maybe it was. But under that sky, with salt in the air and the tide washing over our feet, it felt honest." That night we sat on the porch swing outside our bungalow under a thin blanket, listening to the ocean make that steady, patient sound that never seems in a hurry to become anything other than what it is. Ethan leaned into me and whispered, "This feels like the beginning again." I turned toward him. "Maybe not the beginning," I said. "Maybe something better." He looked at me carefully. "Better? We know more now." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I used to think love meant giving everything up," he said, "or taking more than you meant to. I didn't know there was another way." "There is," I said. "It's choosing, on purpose, every day." He tucked the blanket more securely around my shoulders, not because I asked, because he noticed. And that tiny action made my throat tighten more than any apology had. The next morning, we watched the sunrise with weak coffee in chipped mugs provided by the bungalow kitchen. We talked about lunch, about whether we should swim before noon, about a ridiculous tourist shop selling shirts none of us would ever wear. Small things, ordinary things. But the tone beneath them had changed. Presence, respect, attention. On the final night, a street musician played guitar near the edge of the boardwalk, and somehow Ethan talked me into dancing barefoot in the sand. The rhythm was uneven. The wind kept tangling my hair across my face. He stepped on my foot once and apologized so dramatically I laughed into his shoulder. Then he pulled back just enough to look at me. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me." I held his gaze. "I didn't give up," I said. "I just needed you to show up too." He nodded like he understood exactly what that cost me. Back home, we didn't pretend everything was solved forever. We just stopped pretending the cold version of us was normal. We learned that a boundary can protect love, but it can also wound it when it's used like a wall instead of a conversation. We learned that silence can protect your dignity, but it can also reveal exactly what your partner has been taking for granted. We learned that independence in a relationship isn't two strangers proving they don't need each other. It's two whole people choosing to meet in the middle without disappearing. And most of all, we learned that intimacy was never a debt. It was never something owed. It was something chosen. Freely, mutually, again and again. Months later, sometimes I still think about that night on the couch. The paused movie, the cold tone, the way one sentence can split a life into before and after. But I also think about the porch and the keys, the chipped mug warming my hands, the sound of Ethan laughing with nothing sharp hidden under it. People think relationships end in one dramatic moment. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they almost end quietly. And what saves them isn't silence. It's what the silence finally forces both people to face.